Hello everyone, I'm your host Phoebe. I hope you're all doing well. Welcome to another episode on the Creative Phoebe channel. If you're new here, thank you for tuning in. And if you're not, thank you for joining. You know why? Because today we're going to be making some rosemary and garlic focaccia bread. Literally the easiest bread recipe you could ever make if you've never made bread before. After gathering all of our ingredients, we're going to start off by measuring out our all-purpose flour. I'm using a measuring cup here, but eventually I'm measuring everything out using a food scale. If you're using a measuring cup, just level out the flour like I did. Altogether, that would be 365 grams of all-purpose flour. Next, we're going to shift it. This is to make the flour a lot finer and easier to work with while adding air into it. That would be really good for that bread. Next, we're going to proof our yeast. What this means, we're going to hydrate it because it's dry. We're using active dry yeast, not instant yeast. We're using 7 grams, which is equals 2 1/4 teaspoons or 1 packet of yeast. We're going to add in some honey to add some sweetness and lukewarm water to activate those yeast granules. After whisking it, we're going to allow the yeast to proof for 5 minutes. Watch this cool way of it activating. After the yeast is proofed, we're going to add in the flour and semolina. And this will be the point where you also add in salt and olive oil. But I accidentally skipped it. But I'll show you how I added them later on in the tutorial. Something to note is that I've added timestamps to this episode, which you will find in the description box below. This will help you access any part of the recipe that you would like to know more about, such as how to knead the dough, how to add dimples to it, and so on. Alright, now we are going to knead the dough. We're going to transfer it to a working surface, and here I have a chopping board to do that. And I'm going to form it into a really nice tight dough before allowing it to have its first rise. Now that I've transferred it to a bowl, I'm going to drizzle on some olive oil. Swirl it around, that way it doesn't stick to the bowl. And this is the point where I added the olive oil. The salt will come later. I'm going to cover this bowl with a cling film wrap and a kitchen towel and allow it to rise for 40 minutes. And this will be the first rise. Meanwhile, we're going to prepare some garlic and rosemary. We're going to need 1 head or 1 bulb of garlic. That would yield about 10 to 12 cloves. We're going to peel them, chop them up roughly, and set them aside. We're going to do the same for the rosemary sprigs by just removing a few of the spines and set them aside too. Now we're going to prepare the baking pan that we'll need to bake the bread dough. We're going to prepare it with some olive oil and brushing it on all of the surface. That way the dough doesn't stick to it. You can also use a baking sheet. That would work too. Now that our dough has risen for the first time, let's check it out and make sure that the yeast did its work. Next, we're going to stretch the dough in that baking pan we just prepared. That way we can allow the dough to rise again for a second time. This is the point where I add in the salt, the one I missed before adding the dry ingredients into the wet after the yeast had proofed. That would be half of a teaspoon of kosher salt. We're going to infuse it in that dough while we're stretching it out. That way it fills the pan and it rises evenly. And this will be the second rise for 50 minutes. Cover it with a warm cloth. That way it encourages the yeast to do its work. After the second rise, we're going to add some dimples to the dough. First, we're going to soak our fingers in some cold water and just go deep into that dough. Make sure you get your fingertips all the way to the base of the dough. That is how the flavor of the garlic and the rosemary will infuse their taste in the bread dough. Submerge a few of those garlic pieces in the bread dough. That way, after the bread has baked, when you bite into it, it will be creamy and soft. Top it off with the rosemary sprigs as well. Now we're going to drizzle on some olive oil and allow the dough to rise again for another hour. We're going to cover this dough again with a warm cloth to create a warm condition for the yeast to help the dough double in size by the time it's ready for us to bake it. Now that the dough has increased in size, we're going to sprinkle on some coarse kosher salt on it to add a nice layer of texture to the crust of the bread. We're going to bake it at 400 degrees Fahrenheit for 40 minutes. And when it's done, it's golden brown. Take a look at that. Allow the bread to cool for about 15-20 minutes before cutting into it. And while we're waiting for that to happen, we're going to sprinkle on our vocal spice, like we always do. Join me as I include the words on the screen. Lord, thank you for the gift of your daily bread. As we gather to eat of this deliciousness, we ask that you heal our bodies from all ailments. Amen. All right, it's about time for us to start cutting into this. You can either cut it into strips or squares. You can have it with cheese or like it is, with friends and family. And whilst you're enjoying it, don't forget to observe that beautiful texture. Don't forget to like, comment, and share it. Don't forget to subscribe as well. All right, you know how it is. Take care of your healthy selves and see you in the next episode. Goodbye.